Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
What's the difference between an emotional appeal in conversation as a leader and emotional manipulation? Where would you say are some easy ways to find that line?
Yeah, it is a fine line. But then it opens up this whole new realm of possibility and lore building of the world. Henry has to muster in himself this ability to be strong when he does not feel strong, to be courageous and brave when he's actually terrified.
I want to take a second to talk a little bit about deaf representation and what it did for this episode.
Their tagline is, if she can see it, then she can be it. And I think that that's a great line for any kind of representation. If you can see yourself on the screen, you can imagine what you can become. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode recap of The Last of Us Season 1 with me, your host, Prof. Noctis, and my illustrious, always ever-present co-host, Evan. How are we doing today, Evan?
I'm doing much better after being called illustrious, and maybe not so sure how I feel about ever-present. That's right on the line of pestilent, I think.
We record so many of these, I feel like you're an ever-present force, at least in my life. And judging from the YouTube output that we're doing, you're ever-present in everybody's life, it turns out. So.
Well, that's why they call me ever-present Evan, I think. So.
I like that. I like that. So today we're discussing episode 5 of The Last of Us, called Endure and Survive.
Endure and survive.
That's right. Hey, do you know the ASL for it? Did you learn it from the show?
Oh, no.
Oh, man, it's something. I think this is endure, but I'm not sure. I think that's what Ellie does. I tried to do it alongside, but...
If you have any illusions about how much we either research and then some things that we totally don't research, that's a very easy thing for us to talk about and research before we start talking. But we also like to surprise each other a little bit so the interactions are good and it's not too scripted. We did not practice the sign language. So if we were scripted very deeply, we would have both known the sign language there. So enjoy being on the journey with us.
Attention to the man behind the curtain.
Well, and what a journey it was on this episode too. There's a lot of things that were set up in episode 4 that appear here in episode 5. Yeah. And Wade, you took some particular issues with Kathleen at the beginning of this episode. Where do we open this episode, and what is it about the way that she had that conversation with those helpless prisoners that irked you so much?
Evan, I hate her. Like I just hate her. And this is a credit to Melanie Linsky, who just does an incredible job making a character that I just hate. And the reason that I hate her, everybody, is because I teach leadership development. I've got a degree in leadership development and education and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, she is such a manipulative leader. And like she is emotionally manipulative. She's using her words just the way that she chimes in. She's like, haven't you heard? Kansas City is free. And I'm like, just stop it, Kathleen.
It's so true. Well, based on your experience and then some of the training that you have, what is distinct about a manipulative leader, and why do you find it to be so offensive to you and offensive to just progress in general, it sounds like?
Okay, so it's the thing where emotional manipulation it's a thing because it works. Right? Sure. But the reason that it works is because you are taking advantage of, in some ways, the inner workings, the inner thoughts, and the vulnerabilities of the people that are listening to you and following you. It's a power dynamic thing where the person who is leading is in control and you are controlling the emotions and the situation for your own gain. Like we talked about in the last episode, Kathleen is a tunnel vision, very self-interested leader that's masquerading as one that's doing it for the greater good. It really irks me, as you can tell.
Well, it's a power imbalance, right?
It is, and that's the problem.
In the context, well, it's one of the problems. In this scenario, the people that she's talking to are captives who were previously opposing or working with Fedra and opposing this rebellion, we can assume. And so they're held at gunpoint. They do not have the freedom to leave. So that's a very clear power dynamic. Now, real quick before we move on, what's the difference between an emotional appeal in conversation as a leader and emotional manipulation? Where would you say are some easy ways to find that line?
Yeah, it is a fine line. But I think that an emotional appeal is built on a sense of conviction and a sense of building empathy between us. But I think that when you're trying to just elicit, empathy denotes connection, whereas sympathy can be a little bit more standoffish. So this might be a good delineation. If you're trying to conjure up some kind of faux emotion in somebody that guilts them, I think guilt is a big thing, or creates a negative emotionality in someone else for the purpose of your own ends rather than the greater good. So Kathleen here, her ultimate piece is, or her ultimate aim is to get after Henry, right? And she doesn't care who is obliterated in the process, Dr. Edelstein, I forget how they pronounced it. But for example, she's okay with sacrificing doctors and individuals and stuff to get her vengeance and her aim. And so anything that she's saying here, it's like, I'm going to strike a little fear. I'm going to strike a little guilt, a little bit of, oh, you're reaping what you sow. Isn't that right? Now, if you want to be better than what you actually are, then this is it. I mean, it's just very condemning rather than helping someone out. An emotional appeal can help make someone better without making them feel condemned. Like you can help someone get better without condemning them first. And I think that that's what she's kind of doing. Remember what she says? She said, yeah, you're just a rat. Like this is not good leadership in a lot of ways. Of course, they're her captives. So does she have to be a good leader to them, even though they're her quote unquote citizens?
Right. Yeah. Responsibility versus the power dynamic that's there. I've heard it said that emotional appeal helps folks to make a more empathetic and informed choice where they have a choice. There's a variety of things that they can do and they're going to choose some of them. And we're trying to make sure that the emotion is a part of that. Don't abandon your emotion versus an emotional manipulation would be you're kind of leading someone to what you would say is one inevitable conclusion.
Or
if they're
or fear-based, right? I mean, remember in the last episode when Dr. Edelstein says to her, you had a gun at my face, and she pulls out the gun and says, is this better? Right? And so that fear is conjured back up. And again, that is a very explicit example of emotional manipulation to get what she wants. But, I think that we can do that with words as well.
Well, there are, and there's a cascading series of decisions made out of fear, some physical safety, some in emergency, some due to immediacy that unfold throughout this episode. And as we transition from this moment with Kathleen, we go back to our main protagonists here that are being held at gunpoint by who we know to be Henry and his younger brother Sam, the Henry that this Kathleen is looking for. And so this opens up the introduction to our first real interactions with these characters. We go from Sam pointing this gun at Ellie and Joel, which is how we started the beginning of episode 4. And now they're in a bit of a tight spot, Joel and Ellie, and they're going to have to talk their way out of it instead of fight their way out of it. And what transpires in their conversation that really sticks out to you that would be important to note? And what do we learn about Sam in particular in the way that this is handled?
Well, it's really interesting because the episode begins with this really fascinating flashback. It kind of just throws you in, right? And it kind of builds up to this moment. Right. So like when you see at the end of episode 4, Joel and Ellie are in crisis with this gun pointed at them, and you're just like, oh, Henry is bad. Maybe I should side with Kathleen. You meet her and you're like, never. But
I wouldn't follow you to McDonald's.
That's a great phrase. I'm going to steal that. But I think it's really smart of the show to say, okay, let's give you a little bit of context for Henry and Sam so that you're warmed up by the time there's this gun sticking in Joel's face. And I'm really curious, even before we get to the conversation with Joel and Ellie and Sam and Henry, what do you make of this choice to start it out by building this sympathy toward who we presume are captors of Joel and Ellie at the end of episode 4?
It's a great question. I think the first thing that sticks out to me is that it's good character building and story building because it answers what does the other side think. There's a lot of times when you meet a character and you say, well, am I only really seeing this from this character's perspective? And what's the whole story? And by spending the time to get to know Kathleen and her frustrations and the context of the way that their rebellion overcame Fedra in this particular context, we are informed by her perspective of Henry the whole time. So it actually makes us more curious about the reality of Henry than if he just showed up and held a gun to Joel and Ellie's head. So I think it gives him something to subvert quickly that helps us to build trust that makes sense for what they're going to have to endure together in the story. Craig Mazin has said that Henry and Sam are representative and analogous of that protect-E role. And they did some things in this episode that are different than the game to kind of subvert some of those things. So they weren't telling the exact same story over and over and over again because we already kind of got some of that in episode 3. So what do you think, though? What does it make you think of why they would kind of do it that way?
I think it's particularly interesting because one of the changes in the show versus the game was the choice of making Sam deaf. And it really changes that protected dynamic, like you said. But then it opens up this whole new realm of possibility and lore building of the world as well. Of like, what is it? Like because I play with a 20-second delay, kind of understand what it means to be hearing impaired in The Last of Us, right? And it's a real detriment because as soon as you realize the clicker is on you. But in the show, it shows just how dependent Sam is on Henry. And one of the things that I absolutely love, we got to talk about this, is Henry is told, Sam's scared because you're scared. He takes all of his cues from you. And boy, isn't that the truth? And so Henry has to muster in himself this ability to be strong when he does not feel strong, to be courageous and brave when he's actually terrified, because that's going to rub off on Sam.
Yeah.
And so he creates opportunities to be brave and to be strong and to tell stories that are going to be riveting and hopeful for Sam. The thing that I love most, you want to talk about a counterbalance to awful Kathleen, Henry's leadership of Sam here, and to build up and make emotional appeals, to build some integrity and to build in some hope and some inherent courage, wholehearted courage. It's just amazing. They've got these images of like a super Sam or a superhero, and Henry comes up with the idea for Sam to shut his eyes and to paint like that hero bandana over his eyes.
Right.
And just like a really cool thing, it shows him his reflection in the knife. And it's like, what a cool way of doing that. And it really made me think of leadership as those that paint the courage over the face of the follower. I think that's a really riveting image. Like, what does a leader do to instill in me a sense of courage when I don't have that?
Yeah, I would think it goes to trust, right? The leadership to instill a sense of courage in those that trust the leader enough to follow. And in this scenario, it's a sibling relationship, so there's kind of some natural dynamics that come with age. But they also use it, I think, to connect Joel and Ellie to Henry and Sam quickly in a way of trust, because anything that they're talking about, Sam doesn't know, right? And so they have to listen to Sam. Now, here's the thing. Henry could have told Sam only in sign language what they were saying, okay? Like, he could have that, and then there could have been this air of mystery and secrecy. But Sam is asking questions, and Henry very succinctly summarizes what they've been talking about in more complicated terms directly to Sam in a way that he understands and can agree with. So if you think about that, it builds trust twice as fast because he has the opportunity to subvert and he chooses not to. So in the relaying of the information and the summary of what he believes has happened in his conversations with Joel and Ellie, in communicating them honestly and succinctly with Sam, I think it establishes the characters' trust with each other enough to justify some of the decisions and interactions that they would have later. And I think that that's really well done. I want to take a second to talk a little bit about deaf representation and what it did for this episode, because there was a lot of conversations around deaf representation in this. And so there's some history with deaf individuals and storylines involving those who are deaf in media. I'm reminded of Mr. Holland's Opus, which is an early one that has a lot of criticism about it now, but it's a composer who has a deaf son, and he struggles to connect with him. It's a prominent deaf story from our childhood. There's a show called This Close. It's a 2017 show. Joshua Fieldman and Shoshana Stern. They're both deaf, from my understanding, and they created a television show about what it's like, and it was very representative. And people point to that one as a big seminal moment in progressing these storylines. I think the Best Picture winner, Coda, was on Apple TV, which is about a daughter who can hear, who has an entirely deaf family, and how they navigate the shipping and fishing industry. It's a fantastic, fantastic movie. It won a lot of awards, and that was a very big moment for that community for us, really, as people in general in film. And so this being a continuation of that in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, I think is an important thing that they took the time to do that. And there was some mixed criticism of the way it was portrayed that you're always going to get, but for the most part, the response was extremely positive and grateful that they would take the time to include characters like this and include folks who have different challenges and opportunities that they're presented with in their life based on where they find themselves. So I think that is important to talk about. And so if you're interested in that particular plot line from this episode and that aspect of it, definitely check out This Close and check out Coda, and to some extent check out Mr. Holland's Opus. But the older I get, the more problems I have with that film. So that's not what we're talking about. But for you, as you're watching it and watching these characters interact in the ways that they kind of have to communicate with each other, what do you think it added to the episode for you, and why was it important that they took the time to tell the story this way?
It definitely added a sense of a new sense of fear, I guess, because it's like, oh gosh, is Sam going to realize? Is he in danger here?
Yeah.
Or what's the new threat, and how are they going to communicate, especially if there's distance between them, right? But it also builds in an emotional appeal, because you do have someone that is not only vulnerable because they are young, but vulnerable because, especially with clickers, you cannot hear them and stuff. And so it's like, when is danger coming? So there's just such an interdependence of this community, and it just elevates that. Also, just as you said, how incredible was it that they went with an actual deaf actor for this
yeah,
role?
I didn't mention that, probably with enough emphasis.
I mean, that's huge, right? And so it's not just representation on the screen, but it's representation from the acting side as well. I mean, this is a really, really powerful and meaningful moment for TV, and I think it shows forth even more, because you can imagine. I would love to read a little bit more about how that in those interactions happened on set, and how retakes and rewrites, even as they were actually living into it, might have happened.
Well, and it led to greater opportunities for the actor who played Sam, too.
Yeah.
There's a very notable, I think it's a Jeep commercial that he starred in that ran for a while. And so I think when you see yourself in something, it makes a way for people to understand it and for others to come behind you. And so that's why representation is important, especially in media and TV, because there are a lot of folks who this is their first introduction to these types of characters, or that someone would have a different worldview or experience with them. And just like everything else, it's important to take the time to intentionally put them in media, because for some people, this is the first or only opportunity they're going to have to see themselves or someone they know and care about represented in these media.
A few years ago, I had a group of students do a group project where they discussed the Gina Davis Foundation. The actress Gina Davis from Thelma and Louise and A League of Their Own. And her foundation is all about representation in media. And their tagline is, if she can see it, then she can be it. And I think that that's a great line for any kind of representation. If you can see yourself on the screen, then you can imagine what you can become. And this is just a great piece. Just to put an exclamation point on what you're saying here, I totally agree.
Well, and it's analogous to experience as well in leadership. I think in leadership positions, it's important to recognize that when we see someone model for us what leadership could be like, or who can be, or what different types of leadership are, that becomes important, because not everybody has the same personality. And so oftentimes in leadership, we think you have to be this politician style leader who's very gregarious and outgoing and extroverted in order to do that. But leadership takes a lot of different forms, and it's not just the person who's in front leading that shows leadership. So I think that's a big theme that kind of goes through these 2 episodes too. So as they go on from their little hideout here, they start to make their way down into the tunnels. They say, hey, listen, there were a bunch of infected in the tunnels. Fedra didn't eliminate the infection. They just drove it underground, and they're still there to some extent probably, but we can probably slip through. Joel and Ellie get a little bit of street cred because Henry says, oh, you fought a clicker? And Ellie's like, 2. We got 2 clickers. And he goes, wow, so you're really capable. And kind of appeals to her. And Ellie's feeling great. But as they're going down into the tunnels and they decide to take this path, Henry kind of makes a little comment about you and your dad.
Oh, yeah. And both of them are like, not my dad. I'm not her dad.
Ellie very quickly goes, he's not my dad, which is great. And so I thought that was an interesting moment because it was their perception now that they were close enough that they could be related in the way that they interacted. And now they're having to clarify that they're not related. So as we talk about cargo moving more to companionship.
Ooh, I like that, cargo to companion.
Yeah, as we talk about cargo moving to companionship, we see kind of a delineating marker as they kind of go into the tunnels here. But when they go into the tunnels, they don't find a horde of infected. What they find is this empty family hideout where it seems like there was a family and they had kids, and there's a painted soccer goal on the wall and a soccer ball, and there's comic books that they read about enduring and surviving, and they're kind of walking around. Talk about this family hideout, what it says about the world, and why they would take the time to be in there, because we see this in the game, and it is a place that you linger, and it's a moment of reflection, and the show mirrors that here. What is important about their discovery of this family hideout?
Well, I think that it shows that there is a will to really live and not just survive, and you're seeing another example of how someone did it. And it included crayons, it included coloring books and soccer and levity. I love that when Joel was like, no, we have to keep moving, Ellie was like, but there's stuff to do here. There's actually things to do here. And it's not like work. It can be play. It can be recreation and leisure. And I think that it really does show us a side of things, like in this dire, dark world, moments of levity bring life. It's not just about enduring and surviving, but there's got to be more than that.
We get a little bit of that in the end of the previous episode where they tell the joke and we see Joel laugh. So it's kind of the release of that tension, maybe. If it was held from that entire time as they go on this harrowing journey into the tunnels, then they're able to have that moment of play, and they kick around the soccer ball. And so the moments of reflection are so important for us and for the pacing, because when action is just constant all the time, it doesn't really tell the whole story, and it cheapens when the moments of greatest tension are happening, because I think we acclimate to them. So those spaces in the storytelling are done both in the TV show and the game really well. So as they exit the family hideout, the dugout, if you will, we get this scene of Kathleen talking with Perry, her kind of right-hand man, and she's discussing her relationship with her brother, and we learn a little bit more about her brother Michael and things that were important to her. There's a particular moment and quote that sticks out as she's describing this, but I want you to talk us a little bit about the nature of their relationship. And the quote that she gets to is that the good parts of her were actually really just parts of him. And she tells this story about what would happen when they were kids in a storm. And we get a sense that a big part of Kathleen's identity is rooted in her brother, but she can't really connect the fact that it's got to be part of her too. But it makes a little more sense why she's so intense and really kind of become this villainous character at this point with the loss of her brother. So I've said all the parts that you may have wanted to say, but tell us about...
You nailed it. It appears that Kathleen's brother, not just by Kathleen's admission and Perry's admission, but also by Henry's, he's a paragon of a person, like the best person that ever lived. I think I texted you and I was like, he's Jesus. He's he's a messianic figure, and which makes it so painful what Henry did. And when he died, the best part of Kathleen died with him. I think that's a really key sentence. Kathleen wasn't always this terrible leader. Now, that does not give her a lot of my sympathy, by the way. It does not forgive her in my book.
Sure.
But it does give some context and some understanding for why she's on this rampage and this warpath.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about what Henry's decision was that led to Michael's betrayal and why it was such a big deal and what made Henry feel like he had to do it. So we kind of get this scene where Henry's talking to somebody who's a kind of a trusted person that he's following, and he's actually following this person, and it leads him to make this decision that he knows is, and he perceives is going to make him a bad guy, which he alludes to later in the episode. I'm a bad guy, Henry says, because I did a bad thing.
Yeah.
Talk to us about Henry's choice here, and who are these characters and influences that would lead him to make this decision that he would then say, now, because I did this, I'm a bad person?
Well, ultimately, he's doing, in some ways, it's very similar to Kathleen here. He is a little tunnel visioned, but it seems to be a more morally appropriate sort of thing. Instead of revenge, it's for protection, salvation of his brother, who is in need of medications. In order to get medication, he has to be a conspirator, a collaborator, I think he's called.
Right.
And so that's what he does. And so you have this sympathy, and even Joel says, I can understand why you did it. Like, I originally, Joel has this perspective of like, yeah, you're scum for doing that kind of thing. But
Sure.
Again, the proximity to the situation, seeing why he did it, what a foreshadowing of things to come in the season for Joel as he's sifting through Henry's lessons of love, protectorship, and empathy.
They become fast friends in a way that we don't really see in the show. And I think that's why those other storytelling elements are so important, is because they kind of have no choice but to trust each other, but they're also well aligned in their kind of values, it seems like, up to that point, because Henry knows his way around and Joel has the means to actually help them escape.
Right.
So they have some companionship out of necessity. So you are left to wonder how much that's going to fray as they go upon what we believe will be at some point a more harrowing journey than just this family establishment that they stumble onto. And so they wait until nighttime and they step outside and they're moving through this street. And as they're going, Kathleen has everybody out in full force. So they know they've got people posted up all over town. And this is a scene almost shot for shot and spacing for spacing, similar to what happens in the game, where there's a sniper in this attic or kind of above a garage in a house at the end of the street, and you start taking this sniper fire, and you are hiding behind these cars. Joel decides that he's going to go around and that he's going to kind of flank and infiltrate the home that the sniper is in, because he says, it's dark and they're not a very good shot. So you stay put, I'll deal with this, and then we'll come around. So Joel goes around, and when he gets into the house, he sneaks up on him. He gives this person a choice. He sees that it's an older gentleman who's clearly not really in the best health even too. And so he's ready to shoot him, but he gives him a choice. Tell us a little bit about what's important about the fact that Joel gives this person a chance and then what inevitably happens.
I mean, it shows a little bit of growth, because I don't feel like episode 1 Joel would be like, let's have a discussion. Joel was such a like shoot first, ask later kind of guy in episode 1, it seemed to me. But here he is, I mean, I think he says, don't make me do it, or something like that, or don't
something
do
to that effect. Yeah.
Something to that effect.
It doesn't have to be this way.
It doesn't have to be this way. So that's the kind of implication there. And but again, Joel's going to do what he needs to do to progress and to proceed forward.
Oh, he's assertive in the moment, that's for sure. I love the idea that you're giving Joel a progress report as he kind of goes. It shows some growth. So
I'm judging him entirely.
Well, that's kind of the whole point of the show, right? Judge Joel, so we don't have to judge ourselves too harshly. It's
much easier that way. And judge Kathleen. Never forget.
I'm going to have to get you a Kathleen sticker to put on your water bottle or something.
We need to get some merch that like Kathleen had it coming or something.
Well, so Joel gets a hold of this sniper rifle, and Joel is a much better shot than this gentleman who he has dispatched, to say it nicely. And right when he gets into position and it's time for his charges, Henry, Ellie, and Sam to start moving up the street, it becomes Mad Max.
Yeah, because in they come. I mean, you've got the off-road vehicles. It is Mad Max. And what a great analogy for that. It feels straight out of that.
We have a garbage truck, it looks like, with a giant plow on the front that says, run. I think on it, spray painted.
I don't remember.
I'll look it up while we're...
I love that.
But as they come, Kathleen gets out, they have them trapped, and Kathleen starts monologuing, but she's under the guise that she's talking to Henry, but nothing Henry can say is going to make a difference here, so I'm going to call it Kathleen's monologue, which officially means that she's a villain because she gets her own little monologue like that. I'll look up what's on the front of the plow and then tell us a little bit about this interaction that happens with Kathleen and Henry and some of the back and forth that happens as they're discussing it while Joel just helplessly looks through the gun sight.
Again, cementing her character for us all. She begins to tell Henry, like, okay, so you're risking it all to save one person. You're risking it all to save one person. She doesn't say exactly that, but he said, he was sick. And Kathleen responds in the most callous way. And I think I texted you. I was like, gosh, I hate her, or something like that, when she said, kids die. They die all the time. And it's like, oh, but that doesn't mean you can't protect one, right? And so especially one that's close to you. And so this monologue is so good because it gives the viewer, us the viewer, a context for, what is the moral of that? What's the morals of saving one and hurting an entire community? Because if this was the best person in the community, as has been said, it was a real sacrifice. It was deeply painful for the community all to save Sam. And
well, it's an impossible situation.
Yeah, it is.
It's an impossible situation. So there's really not any definitive answer.
But for her, it's not an impossible situation because it's very much like the good of the many instead of the few. Right? Even though she's got this connection to the one, it's still under the guise of leadership. Yeah. And it's the whole society here. So it's a perversion of larger issues of for the many or the few because she's so close to it, but it's still kind of that same mindset. At least she's leveraging it that.
Their two ideals can't coexist, right? So that's what makes it impossible because they have definitive, I don't want to lose my brother. I don't want to lose my brother either. Yeah. We're led to believe that it wasn't possible for there to be another way out, that they were kind of headed for a direct collision. And speaking of direct collisions, we see a fire that got started because Joel is able to shoot this vehicle with the plow on it that crashes into a building. And then the fire has somehow weakened the structure of this building and it starts to collapse in. So just at the right time, when things are looking most dire for our heroes, just like real life, a garbage truck starts falling through a sinkhole. And we see visually, in my opinion, the most terrifying thing that we've seen so far.
Truth. I mean, we, at this point... It's been a little while since we've really seen clickers and infected. Because I don't remember if we saw too many during the Bill and Frank episode, and we didn't really see hardly any, maybe at all in episode 4. And so here they make up for that by having the biggest infected horde that you can imagine emerge. And not only that, but we have what's called a bloater, which has absorbed all of the underground water and has become this super infected, gross, bulbous thing, which is also terrifying in the game. If you watch the Lecter play, you know that you just have to run around them long enough and they'll die. Go check out the Lecter play for more strategies like that.
Yeah, they get dizzy and fall over is apparently the correct solution. So we see this bloater and we see this horde, and they're immediately pushing out into this well-armed crowd, well-organized, well-armed crowd, and it is absolute chaos.
It is.
It is very clearly, even though these people are trained to some extent, or at least experienced in dealing with these things, this is an overwhelming force. And so the bloater is kind of working through, and kind of off and out of focus. You see its strength. It's just shot a whole bunch, and it just doesn't matter because it's covered in this kind of like the fungus that's kind of hardened over, so they can't really get through. And it just kind of starts ripping people apart. I will say in the game, it has a couple signature kill maneuvers that I'm very familiar with because of how many times I have been killed by them.
Same.
And they did a really accurate job having it dismember the members of this group in a similar way to what you could expect to experience in the video game. And I was sitting on my couch going, ah!
I know.
the entire time. And it would get another person, and I'd be like, oh! And so,
not again.
It was a wild ride. It was a wild ride.
It was. And let us not forget that once again, this is a failure of Kathleen's leadership, because in episode 4, she refused to help contain. Like there was like, there's things going on over there. She's like, we'll save it for later. Well, later has come to get the payment.
Yeah,
so.
we said it was a snooze button, and now the alarm is going off.
The alarm has gone off. Sorry,
the fungal
Kathleen.
hens are coming to roost. And so they are starting to make their way, and Ellie and Henry and Sam take this as an opportunity to make their exit. They escape. There's a really creepy scene with Ellie where a clicker, who's a young child clicker, kind of crawls backwards through the window and does this kind of crazy dance.
Like they're like in a church van, and she's like crawling through.
Right, exactly.
I was like thinking of old retreats.
Yeah, that is how it goes. That is how it goes. I drove a bus of kids, and we turn around, and they had climbed up in the luggage racks, and were like going back and forth. Maybe that is where the inspiration of clickers
That's
came from.
probably there's some religious trip trauma that's going on in this episode.
We were like, we can't drive this bus until you're in your seat with your seatbelts. You know that, right? Like, we're not going to go down the interstate.
Don't make me pull this over.
Yeah, don't make me. Yeah, I can't pull out onto the street, and I'll pull it over even further.
You're not my dad.
That's exactly it. They must have really been paying attention to Ellie there. So Joel is kind of raining shots down very accurately from his sniper's nest, feeling very helpless. And I think the acting by Pedro Pascal here is great, because he has to express all of his concern and terror.
And his injured, broken hand, right? Yeah. Fractured hand as well. I mean, the whole thing, it shows his age, his and his vulnerability in this moment, and distance from the action. So
and earlier he said he was 56.
56.
So they are starting to show, hey, listen, he's obviously assertive and has some capabilities, and he's really a kind of a powerful character when it comes to his ability to exert violence. But also, we're starting to see some of his frailty, which we've seen his emotional frailty, but now we're starting to see some of his physical frailty. So they kind of end up escaping, right? I mean, for lack of a better term, there's a very close call where there's a bunch of monsters scrabbling all around them under this car, and they fight them off, and they kind of escape. And so they make it to this apartment. Tell us anything that stuck out to you from kind of their escape, and then set the scene for us when they're sitting in this apartment, essentially debriefing.
Well, Kathleen gets what she deserves, right? And it's like, I feel like we have to close that loop, because I've spent so much time.
I was leaving it to you.
Yeah, I thank you so much, because it's just so satisfying. You know, she's again got this monologue, and it seems as though she's once again got the upper hand, when out of nowhere, the child clicker infected jumps like a spider monkey, to quote Ricky Bobby's son, jumps at her, tackles her, and just ends her. And I was like on my couch cheering. I was like, do it again. Like drag her through the church bus. Let's get this leadership out of here. So I'll see my therapist about this later.
You're just going to walk into the session and then just hit play on this part of the episode and say,
this is
all I need to talk about today.
Am I
How broken am I?
How broken am I? It's bad, right? It's really bad. I'm paying you double today.
Paying the extra difficult trauma rate. I don't think they have those. Is that what the sliding scale means?
I hope so. They gotta get tipped somehow.
There's like 5 therapists that are like, thank you for mentioning that. Anyways, so they start their debrief, sans therapist in this apartment after Kathleen gets her just desserts. And they are kind of unpacking and debriefing a little bit. And we see more of that connection between Joel and Henry. But I think the more poignant scene is between Ellie and Sam. As they kind of have this frank and honest discussion. And Sam is asking her questions on the kind of flip board that they have where they can write on it and then erase it by lifting it up. And Ellie's learned a little bit of sign language at this point. Sam's kind of taught it to her, but this is the way they're communicating primarily is through this back and forth conversation on this flip board. So it's very direct, it's very simple, and I think that lends to a little bit of the vulnerability that exists here too when Sam asks her a question that I think we both found very pointed, which was,
are you ever afraid? Or do you ever get scared? Something along those lines. And she at first says, of scorpions. And he just kind of looks at her because he's really scared at this point. And then she says of ending up alone, which, boy, that's huge. Because, I mean, who has she had? Everyone that she's been around and had begun to trust has been taken from her from episode 1 with Marlene, and then Tess, and now she's just got Joel, and he's treating her like cargo, but maybe not, and she's just afraid of being alone. And so that's when Sam shows her that he's been bitten. And this, to me, was such a powerful thing. This, again, was not, I don't believe it's in the game. At least not.
We'll find out on Tuesday.
Quite as viscerally as this. Yeah, that's true. We will find out on Tuesday in my blind electroplay of this, I guess. But he he shows the wound, and Ellie says, my blood is medicine. And she takes a knife and slices part of her hand and tries to mesh her blood with his on his leg in a way that only makes sense to a child, right? It's like this should work. This is why we're going to the Fireflies, so that I can give my immune blood to someone else, and maybe it'll work here. And it's a desperation move. And she doesn't want to tell the adults because they're going to overreact, right? And so it's like, I can handle this. And then he says, will you stay awake with me? And of course she can't. And then the end of this episode, it's like, can we have one happy ending of an episode ever?
No.
The answer is no.
Let's talk a little bit about what this reveals about Ellie's character that we're going to want to make note of as we approach the end of season 1. So without going into too many specifics about the ending, and we'll discuss that at length when we get there, we learn a part of Ellie's nature and character here that is going to be important to hang on to, and it's this idea that she was willing to sacrifice something from herself to actually be able to help. Where did that sit with you, and what did it make you think of about the nature of her character and maybe what her decision making might be in the future if she was given the choice?
Well, I think more than anything, I mean, it's foreshadowing of the future, right? And a particular dilemma that is coming for her, or just that is going to be existing. But right now, I think what it shows, especially alongside her statement that I don't want to be alone, she'll go to any length to make sure that she's not alone now. And so this is something that's like, that's my ultimate fear. So I will sacrifice a part of myself in order to maintain that. What can I do to fix that? And ultimately, I think it also is beginning to say, almost like that sense of survivor's guilt. So many others have died.
Yeah.
Why me? Why am I immune? And what can I do to like make it matter? And we'll certainly get into that theme in later episodes.
It's a lot of pressure for anybody. It's definitely a lot of pressure for a 14-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the morning comes and it's not so great. We're awoken to a screeching Sam who launches.
Well, Sam's just looking out the window, and then Ellie goes to check on him. And at first, there's a little bit of hope that he didn't turn, and then it's very
past
clear.
that because I'm so sad.
I know, right? You don't steal the struggle. We have to go through it.
No, I want to avoid the pain.
So and I just relish it, especially when it's Kathleen. Anyway, Sam goes crazed at this point because he's infected. And that's when Henry and Joel come in. And it all happens so fast, as you can imagine it would. And Henry ends up shooting. The protector eliminates the protected himself. And he goes into full shock at this moment, turns the gun on Joel, and then he's just like, what did I do? What did I do?
Yeah.
And it ends in the most tragic way because Henry, unable to kind of cope with this, his purpose, his reason, like we talked about in episode 3, Bill says to Frank, you were my purpose. That's kind of what Henry has with Sam. And now his purpose is gone. In fact, he subverted that purpose, even though there's all kinds of rationale for, yes, he did the right thing. What does that leave him? And so he turns the gun on himself, and it just ends terribly for both of them.
It's horribly tragic.
Yes.
Which is just kind of how we end every single one of these episodes.
It's true.
Just horribly tragic.
Which is what kind of cements this change in Ellie. We move from this kind of jovial, retortive, adolescent to someone that's becoming a little bit more withdrawn. And we see that at the end of the episode. Joel has buried both Henry and Sam, and they've made makeshift graves for them, which is becoming a theme at this point. And then Ellie places the flipboard on the grave and simply says, I'm sorry, with the words on the flipboard. And what we're seeing here is Ellie's beginning to spiral, and she's beginning to see the cost is great. And so it's, again, giving some purpose to her mission and what she needs to do, make it matter.
Yeah, and you don't apologize for things that you don't feel are typically your responsibility. And Ellie's character up to this point does not. I'm reminded of the conversation that she had with Joel after Tess died, where she says, this just happened, don't blame me. Well, to some extent, it seems like Ellie's blaming herself a little bit there. And so to go from where she was there to here starts to show the ways that getting out of the city that she's been in.
What do you think it is about the way things went down that prompts Ellie to apologize to Sam and Henry?
I don't know how much in her life she's felt very responsible for someone. Like she's been the charge. You know, she was someone that had to be taken care of. We know that she lost a friend in the abandoned mall. But as far as, you know, the responsibility that you feel when there's a child who is in need is, I think, inherently instinctual. And so I'll try to say this succinctly. That instinct, and instinct in general, is an interesting thing because it evokes thoughts, emotions, feelings, and responses from us that come from a place that we don't pick out and choose necessarily. It's like when it strikes a nerve. It's like it's that instant reaction. And so I think that we do have these cultivated protective instincts, especially when it comes to children, that are inherent to our human nature. Everyone has them a little differently. But I'm reminded I was at a soccer game just last week, and we were getting on an escalator, and there's 2 escalators that go side by side, and they go up, right? And so as we're going up on the escalator, all my friends and I are kind of in one group, and then we look down, and I hear, Mama? And it's like right in front of me, in between all our friends. And I look down, and there is what has to be a 7-year-old child that we do not know. His family is not anywhere on the escalator with him or anything like that. And this child is like looking for his parents on this escalator, and they've gotten separated. Well, in that moment, I didn't actively say, we're going to make sure this kid is safe. You know, it's a short ride to the top of the escalator. I'm sure they're somewhere. Like, it's not a big deal. But there were a lot of things racing through my mind. And I say that because I felt that protective instinct where this is not my child. I did not know this child existed up until this moment. This is now my responsibility because I'm here and I see this. And there's not another adult here. So until we find his parents or I can get him to, you know, guest services or something, I don't know how long this charge is going to exist on my life. Because if we couldn't find his parents, then I'm going to have to take him to the stadium people, and they have processes and procedures for this. But at that moment, this child is my charge.
Yeah.
And his mom was just riding the elevator or escalator, and I said, hey, anybody missing a child? And she goes, oh, and they had a bunch of kids with them. And, the kid was very upset, but he was quickly reunited with his family, and it was all fine. But it's, I think, exactly in that moment where that maybe is something that Ellie was feeling, because I just recently experienced it not even a week ago. And it taps into, I think, a deeper part of our existence and kind of those instincts. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, just to comment on what you just said, I think that's such a great image. We say on the show a lot that proximity produces empathy, right? But I think that proximity also produces responsibility. And I think that you're experiencing that. Like, there are things that happen in our city and on our watch that, whether we like it or not, we are in some ways responsible for. We're responsible for reporting. We're responsible for setting up and stepping up to solve, even in moments where we have no authority or ability to do it. It's at least in our concern and our care. And so that's why we have the phrase, not on my watch, right? Like, so many people will say that at different times and at different circumstances. And I think that you're right that saying Ellie may feel some sense of responsibility because these were our friends and there was nothing we could do. Secondly, though, I wonder if she's also saying that because she couldn't help him. Like, she didn't have the know-how to transmit her blood to him, to heal him. And so maybe it's, I'm sorry that we weren't there fast enough, didn't get to the fireflies fast enough or something like that. So there's a lot of things that are wrapped up in that specific statement. But regardless, she's beginning to feel the burden of this blessing of immunity.
Yeah, there's only two ways I think that probably would go. It's either I'm sorry this happened or I'm sorry because I feel responsible. And I definitely think you're right. Ellie falls in the I'm sorry I feel responsible category. But as they kind of move on, we're left with this feeling of loss. They got close to these folks quickly. They read comics together. They felt responsible. And so Joel and Ellie now have something even more to process together.
They do.
As they kind of do.
And they've trauma bonded.
It's a great point.
I mean, this is going to bring them even closer together. And it's certainly endearing Joel to Ellie more, especially because he's learning how to be more of a protector again. He's seeing all of these different archetypes and in channeling his own fatherly instinct. And that's kind of the pathway forward.
Well, as we see these kind of instincts reawaken in him over the course of these last 5 episodes, it opens the door and starts to set the stage for this kind of second half of this season 1 that we're going to experience, ultimately culminating in kind of Joel's ultimate choice on that final episode. So I think this one is just another intense episode.
They don't give us a lot of breathing room, Thankfully, we had the soccer game and that sweet, sweet demise of Kathleen.
Well, I'll let you get to linger on that as we kind of wrap up. But thanks everybody for listening. And I'll do the outro.
Yeah, go for it.
Everybody, we're enjoying doing this lecture play series on The Last of Us. Join us every Monday for episode recaps, Wednesdays for expert interviews and discussions, Tuesdays for the playthrough of the game where Wade plays on a 20-second sound delay internally on extra
Hopefully
hard
it's
mode.
fixed by now.
You're going to get it fixed. And we can continue to process those things. So check out the VODs, and we'd love to see you live in the stream. As always, feel free to comment on the Discord or the YouTube comments. We love to hear your thoughts, questions, and we appreciate all the thoughtful questions from our last couple episodes as well. So thank you, and remember, when you're lost in the darkness,
look for the light.
Bye, everyone. Thanks to Husky by the Geek for our theme music. Thanks to Nick Smith for our graphics. And most of all, thanks to you. This program is brought to you by viewers like you, and we hope that everything is going great for you this week, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Take care of yourself. Hang in there. You got this. Bye-bye.